I'm going to break down for you the 5-step process to executing a successful cutting phase, okay? Now, it's important that you understand how to do this in a way that maximizes muscle retention or even muscle gain along this process. A lot of people will start a cut and they'll start losing strength pretty quickly. That's a big red flag. Or you just might simply not know how long to take it, what happens when there's certain red flags you should be looking out for, and how to adjust continuously to shed as much body fat as you want and until you reach the goal. So that's what we're going to discuss today, all backed by some of the latest literature to help me break down the validity of these points. So these 5 steps starts with, of course, setting the right target. If you saw my how to bulk video, then you will understand this is a very similar process, but there's a few important differences here, of course. Setting the right targets means, first and foremost, setting either an ideal body weight, which is probably the best way to go. Set a body weight that you're aiming to get to. Once you get to that body weight, you can now reassess whether it's time to keep going or you're actually good there. Maybe along the way towards that weight, you decide, hey, I actually achieved the level of leanness I'm looking for to now go into my next goal, okay? So you have to identify for yourself what that either body weight or level of leanness is. Generally speaking, if you have no idea where that might be or what a good range to be in is for to then start the next productive, let's say, bulking phase, it's gonna be somewhere around 10% body fat for men, or 18% body fat for women, which of course looks different one person to the next. But again, it's just a general guideline. You should be somewhere in this realm for you to start getting lean enough for it to actually be a significant difference and to be in a spot where if you decide to reverse into a bulk, it's going to be a productive starting point, okay? So you're gonna take this essentially as far and as long as you need to until you reach the goal. That's the whole point of the cut. So how fast you need to go is the next thing we have to identify. And this is a very simple recommendation. For most people, it's 0.5 to 1% body weight loss per week. So if you weigh 200 pounds, that equates to somewhere around 1 to 2 pounds lost weekly. If you go faster than this, the literature shows it's probably a bad idea because you now start to risk muscle loss, or at least there's a higher risk of it, and a higher risk of it occurring sooner, of course. Not only that, but symptoms of diet fatigue will set in more than likely, number one, and more than likely much sooner than is ideal. So what are these symptoms of diet fatigue? Of course, it includes the general weight loss issues that happens from being in a deficit for prolonged periods of time or simply too aggressively. And that is things like mental fog, intense cravings, which lead to binging behaviors, could be significant decrease in energy, could be a decrease in libido due to hormonal issues, or all of the above. Performance in the gym is a big indicator, as I've already mentioned. So if you want to avoid diet fatigue, if you want to avoid muscle loss and just getting really skinny, losing weight and not just body fat, then losing at a rate faster than this is not a good idea. So now we understand the targets and we've set ones that are appropriate. We can now move on to how to actually achieve these targets on the surface. Level 1 of achieving these targets is, of course, say it with me, calorie deficit. Calorie deficit is the only thing that actually drives weight loss on the surface. So hormones and macros and everything else beneath the calorie deficit doesn't matter if the calorie deficit isn't achieved in the first place, as long as weight loss is concerned, okay? So with that said, now obviously fat loss can occur as far as staying at a maintenance level, but it's inferior as far as speed of weight loss that you wanna see, and as far as just getting the cut over with and trying to avoid these diet fatigue issues. Now you can lose body fat and gain muscle at the same time, effectively staying at the same weight because your calories are, let's say, at a maintenance. That can occur, but it's going to be inferior as far as rate of results you want to see than a deficit, okay? So deficit is ideal. The best, a good general range for deficit that you want to help and achieve these goals is going to be somewhere between 10 and 20% deficit. This is at the start of the cut, of course, okay? So you're not continuously adjusting 10 to 20% necessarily. We'll talk about that shortly here. But an example of this is if your maintenance calories are at 3,000 to start the cut, well, you can simply start by cutting that down 10 to 20%, which would be landing you somewhere in the range of 24 to 2,700 calories. That would be your starting point. Now, me personally, I like to err on the side of conservative starting points. Again, because this is a slow and steady game, it is faster than bulking, but you don't want to get stuck in trying to do like an aggressive mini cut, but just prolonging it and hopefully getting it done and lose it. It's not going to play out in your favor in the long term, especially the more advanced your training age gets. So if you get into the habit of doing cuts this way early on, well, it's going to only work less and less effectively for you every single year that continues. So it's not a good habit to get in up front, okay? Now, with that said, we're going to move on to macros. Step number 3. Not every calorie deficit is created equal. So remember I said to lose weight, to lose body fat, a calorie deficit is going to be the superior way to do it, and in many cases, the only way to do it, right? Essentially. Now, with that said, if I'm in a calorie deficit comprised completely of sugar, somehow if you pull that off. Funny enough, most people would think, well, you won't lose any weight. In fact, you will lose weight, but you'll feel like shit. You'll lose tons of muscle because there's not enough protein. So all of that is to say, you're going to be extremely hungry, right? Your blood sugar is going to be a mess, which isn't all that relevant for this, but in the case of eating pure sugar, it would be. So the point that I'm mentioning there is not every deficit is the same. Not every calorie is created equal. Calories in, calories out, yes, that's level 1. We're going beyond that now because your goal is not just to lose weight like 99% of the population that loses 30 pounds and gains the same 30 and loses the same 30 time and time again, because those people don't have a bigger goal, which is build an incredible physique. If your goal is to build an incredible physique, which obviously if you watch my content, it is, then we have to understand calories are not created equal. You can't expect to be on a cut and only eat protein bars and protein shakes, very little or no vegetables, and think that it's going to be better than somebody who has a nutrient-dense diet. And macros are going to come into play first and foremost for that. So making sure that you have high enough protein is going to be ideal in making sure that you are full enough that you get the benefits of the extra added thermic effect of protein versus the other macronutrients. And of course, the benefit of retaining more muscle, keeping protein synthesis elevated as much as you can, even though you're in a deficit throughout this process. That range is going to look somewhere between 0.7 grams per pound of body weight and 1.5 grams per pound of body weight. Now, there has been plenty of benefits shown in the literature that people eating slightly higher amounts of protein typically feel a lot more full, more satiated. Again, they can get away with eating more calories because the extra thermic effect means a slightly elevated metabolism versus a control group, let's say, that doesn't do that, and a potential increase of muscle retention or even muscle gain depending on training age. So my recommendation is always to be at a minimum 1 gram per pound of body weight as far as the cut goes, but I would recommend if you can, if it's practical and there's no issues for you, let's say kidney issues or gastrointestinal issues, I recommend 1.5 grams per pound of body weight. Okay, so anywhere in this range should technically be ideal, but in a deficit, I would err on the side of an increase. Fats, 10 to 25%. Versus a bulk, you'll notice I mentioned the range for fats is generally around 20 to 35%, as that's standard for athletes. However, in the case of losing body fat and getting leaner and leaner over time, in an attempt to hold as much muscle as possible, we actually want to prioritize carbs. The literature has shown that actually in the case of physique athletes dieting for competition, those that stand on the stage with more amounts of muscle mass and perform better throughout, retain their strength more, and feel better were the ones that had slightly higher carbohydrate intakes, not only from the beginning, but all the way through until the end. So it's probably a good idea to keep carbs as high as you can keep them while the deficit continues, okay? So because of that, it may make sense for fats to continuously get slightly lower and lower over time, as some competitors in the studies were shown to go as low as 10% of their fat intake. 10% of their calorie intake was fats, because they obviously were getting just lean enough, they were almost done, whatever it is, but they were prioritizing carbs. So you're gonna land somewhere in that range. Carbs take up the remaining of your calories. Whatever is left from your calories after your protein is set, after your fats are set, that's going towards carbs. To go off our previous example of a maintenance of 3,000 calories, setting your starting macros might look something like this. If you are 200 pounds and you decided to go with 2,500 calories to start your deficit, you might set protein at a safe 1 gram per pound of body weight. In which case that's 200 grams of protein, and in comparison to your calorie target, that is 32% of them. From there, let's say we set a 20% fat target. That sets your fats at 55 grams. And lastly, the rest is going to be filled in with carbs, which in the case of this starting point is 300 grams of carbs, or 48%. So a very high carbohydrate intake is great just to start the cut. Of course, it's going to decrease as we go along, but we'll get into that shortly. Your macros are now set up in such a way that it's going to be conducive to being able to sustain this deficit, sustain a deficit for a long enough period of time at this rate of weight loss in a way that's going to maximize muscle retention. So far, so good. 2 more steps to go. Step number 4 is how we actually distribute the food intake to maximize those benefits I just mentioned. And it's going to look like this. 3 to 5 protein servings, feedings throughout the day, ideally with similar amounts of protein split up evenly, and each meal split up somewhat evenly as far as hours between meals go, is going to be ideal to maximize muscle protein synthesis, nitrogen balance, as a result, muscle retention. Okay? And of course, to tie it in the rest that I mentioned. Now, 2 of these meals, 2 of these servings, should probably be somewhere around the workout, 1 to 3 hour window, pre and post. This is probably going to be ideal to maximize your training session, which is going to be important to maximize muscle retention. Okay, how many times do I have to say that throughout this video? Probably 100 more. We'll see. So peri-workout nutrition is going to be imperative for anybody interested in building and revealing an incredible physique. And of course, some of these protein feeding somewhere around bedtime. So hopefully shortly before going to bed and somewhat shortly after waking up, as obviously bedtime is a long period of time that you are going without any food whatsoever. So with that said, there is something to note here that a lot of people are probably wondering about or don't realize, and that is fasting, intermittent fasting. Now, intermittent fasting, while it can be actually proven to be an effective strategy for weight loss as far as not needing as many calories because you feel more full from the shortened eating window, all of the potentially other benefits in there as well. As far as retaining muscle, it's actually not ideal. Okay, so the recommendation here, the difference between somebody looking to lose weight where fasting might actually prove to be a valuable tool for them, and it was something that I used to recommend to clients back in the day when my target with clients was helping them just with weight loss primarily. Now, a recommendation geared towards physique, either athletes, I would call you an athlete if your goal is to build a physique, whether you compete or not. I'm not planning on competing. I still regard myself as a physique athlete because my goal is to build my best physique, right? In which case, your recommendation is actually not to fast. That would not be ideal. Instead, you should simply add volume without more calories or even with reduced calories to each meal. What that looks like is something I've been suggesting for a long time now, which is big ass salads. So turning your last meal of the day instead of chicken and rice, maybe as carbs reduce, you can't have the rice there. You keep your carbs to be around the workout period, which makes sense. But instead of that later meal, you have that chicken with a massive salad mix that has so many vegetables and effectively reducing the calories of that meal, but massively increasing the satiety and of course the nutrient density in general of your nutrition day to day, which means you can keep the eating window the same, effectively keeping muscle protein synthesis as elevated because you still get a big shot of protein in that salad, but satiety will be massive. And I did this for the first time actually in my last cut. It allowed me to get down extremely lean without any diet fatigue at all. And that's because I felt so full from having this higher volume. So that is the recommendation I would make. If you start to get hungry, if you start to experience any sort of diet fatigue, start ramping up volume of food, nutrient density, and calories should come down if you're replacing things like more calorie dense foods like rice, and you replace them with more nutrient dense foods like vegetables. That'll go a long way. So that's the recommendation as far as timing goes. Now, the last part, and probably the most important, is adjusting, because of course you have to continuously adjust this, and typically that's going to be weekly, at the very least monthly, to keep this rate of weight loss up and to keep yourself managing these diet fatigue symptoms. Now, in order to effectively adjust and know what to adjust and when, you want to be tracking the following: body weight every single day, so you can track weekly trends. You want to track photos monthly at the minimum, so every 4 weeks. Measurements along with those every 4 weeks. Training, every single training session, of course, throughout the week, and nutrition every single time. Now, if you feel like this sounds like a lot of work or this sounds like so many apps and all this stuff, I've actually created a solution that houses all of this stuff into one, allows you to effectively execute all this and optimize it very, very easily. It's called Elite Physiques. You can check the link in the description to try it out for 10 days free and see what I mean. But you're going to want to track those effectively every single week to actually gather the data, see the charts and trends you need to know precisely what and when to adjust. When it comes to what and when to adjust, there's a few basic things here. First is cardio or steps. You can increase the amount of cardio you do or the intensity of cardio you do and the amount of steps you do throughout the day. In other words, NEAT, which is known as non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which simply means the amount of calories you're expending on a day-to-day basis via baseline just through walking around. So you're increasing calorie expenditure via these two methods, or you're decreasing calorie intake via simply cutting the calories down from either fats or carbs. So ideally we want to keep protein about the same throughout the entirety of the cut. And you want to be cutting down from, like I mentioned before, some fats, which is why the fat will reduce over time. And of course, you're going to have to cut some carbs in that process as well. So throughout that process, you're cutting calories, or you're increasing expenditure, or you could do a combination of both in one fell swoop. You want to essentially try to manage a balance of these two things so you're not doing them both aggressively or that you're not doing one of them too aggressively. For example, you want to keep calories the same the entire time throughout this deficit because you're not managing your macros very well or your timing, there's not enough nutrient density. So what do? You're working out for like 3 hours a day now. Okay, that can work, but it's probably not sustainable, practical, or even enjoyable, right, for most people. So manage a good balance of these two so you're not cutting calories too steeply or increasing calorie expenditure too steeply either. And you have to be aware of diet breaks and refeeds. Now, these would require their own video as far as all the nuance involved in them, but just know this: a diet break is a period of 1 up to 2 weeks that you essentially bring your calories to a maintenance level. You take yourself out of a deficit. And the reason you would do this is because, let's say you've been in your deficit for 16 weeks, give or take a few weeks, and you're really experiencing the symptoms of diet fatigue, and you have a long way to go still. You might have another 6, 8, 10 weeks to go because you had a lot of body fat to lose. Perhaps you underestimated it, which happens very often. Then a diet break might make the most sense in that case for adherence purposes and to dissipate a lot of this fatigue as well as training fatigue, okay? So a diet break is a tool you can use if these symptoms start to creep up on you. However, if you want to reduce the chance that you need a diet break and reduce the chance of these symptoms coming up in general, that's where refeeds come in. Refeeds are a very valuable tool, and a refeed is essentially a day or multiple days throughout a given week where you're bumping calorie intake up to or slightly above maintenance, which of course will help to eliminate any sort of potential diet fatigue. But so long as your total caloric intake throughout the entire week is still in the deficit you want to achieve this rate of weight loss, then the refeed not only acts to mitigate and manage diet fatigue symptoms along the way, but also increase muscle retention because nitrogen balance can be completely positive for most of an entire day. So it really depends, and it's really going to come down to how advanced, how much you know, how much data you're gathering. It's going to come down to those factors to identify if a refeed strategy makes sense for you or will even be that effective for you, if it's worth the overcomplexity. For example, myself, I'm typically refeeding on my cuts every single week on a Sunday. Most people consider it like cheat days, but a refeed is actually strategic. It's not just a cheat day. So I would typically refeed to where my weight would fluctuate up several pounds the next day due to being back at a maintenance or a surplus. And this would drastically reduce my chances of ever experiencing diet fatigue and helped keep me full, retaining a lot more muscle strength along the way. Again, these would require their own videos, so if you want me to make one just describing how to use these two things along the way of your cut, then by all means drop a comment below and I'd be happy to make it for you because there is a lot of science that goes behind these as well. But just keep these in mind. These are two tools that you may want to use along the way as you're adjusting based on all the data you're gathering, based on how you're feeling, based on the rate of weight loss you're achieving, based on how your nutrition's been, and all of the factors mentioned here today. I hope that now that you've watched this, you understand better how to not only execute a cut, but do so in a way that's conducive to actual sustainable results long term, and of course, more importantly, setting you up for a productive bulk to happen so that the next time you cut, you look significantly better than this time, which is obviously the whole point here. You have to go through a cut at some point. As much as we love bulking, you have to go through the cut at some point, so it's best that you're armed with the right tools, the right understanding as to how to do it in a way that doesn't have you demotivated, doesn't have you questioning whether or not you want to do this anymore, doesn't have you losing a ton of the progress you made over the last year or two, and sets you up for success in the long term. So if I had known this sooner, I would have saved myself years and pounds of muscle. But I had to go through several cuts completely incorrectly because the information just simply wasn't out there. The evidence wasn't out there. The literature wasn't there. And so I am happy to be here now, having learned it all through my own experience, through working with hundreds of others, and of course through knowing all the data and research to help break it down for you and hopefully save you the years as a result. So with that said, any other topics you want to see as always, drop them down below. I appreciate you for watching as always, and I will catch you in the next video. I'm out.